So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guest was this guy called Mike McCallowich, if I pronounced that right. But he's known as Mike Motorbike, partly because people mess up his surname. So he's kind of stepped in and given himself a little nickname there, so people can find him on the internet a little bit easier. But he's a business speaker, really, and he's a writer of business books. And yet what he was talking about in terms of business was, I think, had a lot of parallels, really, with the sort of things that we talk about here on this podcast. And what he was talking about is what happens when a business, and he kind of specialises in mentoring small businesses, the kind that have been struggling, during this particular situation. And he says, what happens when a business is in a difficult place, a bit of a crisis situation? And the exercise that he said is, if you kind of get a piece of paper and if you draw a circle in the middle of the piece of paper and write the letter A inside of it, and that's where you are. And so let's say that's where you are in a time of crisis or discomfort or whatever it happens to be, whatever best kind of describes it. But it's a place that you don't want to be in. Much like the businesses he's talking about here, they don't want to be in a particular situation, and so they're trying to get out of it. They're trying to change. It might be due to crisis, it might not. But when we're feeling those feelings of discomfort, then, as he says, get a piece of paper, draw a circle in the centre, and then in the middle of that circle, write the letter A. And then draw some arrows that represent directions that mean that you're no longer in that uncomfortable place. You might draw an arrow up, or you might draw an arrow to the right-hand side or to the left-hand side or down below or southwest or northeast or whatever. And he said, draw lots and lots of different arrows that signify different ways of getting away from A. Now, all of those things will get you away from A, the place of discomfort, the place of crisis. But then what he tells you to do is, up in the very top left-hand corner, do another circle and then write the letter B in it. And so what that signifies is going from A to B, from going from the place where you don't want to be to the place where you do. And the reason why he gets business owners to do that exercise is so that they realise that B, in this kind of little map, B is the place where they need to end up. B is the place where they're acting in accordance with their best health as a business. And yet when they were in A, look how many arrows there were in all sorts of different directions that, granted, got that business away from A, but didn't actually get them where they needed to be. Some of the arrows, in fact, were taking them further away from where they needed to be. And so when I was listening to him talk about this idea around business, that you're starting off in an uncomfortable place that you need to change from, and then there's all these different possible ways to get out of A. And yet the place that you really want to be is B. And yet in that panic of moving away from the discomfort, from the situation that you don't want to be in, you can kind of end up anywhere. And some of those steps that we take will actually take us away from where we want to be. And, my favourite example is, I want to, and it's a strange example at the moment, but I'll still use it because it's the one in my mind. But that kind of thing where, we get an invite to a gathering and we want to go because we want to make new friends or whatever. And so that's our B. And yet at the point in which we're about to go, we get really awful, uncomfortable feelings maybe. And so we're in A at that point. We're in the A circle thinking, I'm feeling really uncomfortable at the moment. And I'm telling myself some scary stories about what will happen if I go to that thing. And so in order to get away from A, we draw an arrow. Anywhere will do, so we're not in A, and we end up doing something that is completely opposite to what we wanted. So I might decide, I'll just watch Netflix, or I'll stay in, or I'll just go for a walk, or it might be I'll stay in and, I don't know, I'll stay in and have a drink by myself or whatever. But none of those things are getting us to where we want to be, which was that circle with the B inside. And so this was a business exercise, and yet it just had so many parallels really in terms of our own growth, because when we're in a place that feels uncomfortable, we can draw these arrows in all sorts of different directions. Or when we're in a place that feels like crisis, we can draw these arrows in all sorts of directions. But it's not necessarily the important thing to get away from where we are at the moment. What is important is that we go towards the change that we actually want. And I think I've said this in a previous podcast as well. There's that phrase of jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Well, some of those arrows, trying to escape A, that circle in the centre of the page, will be exactly that, won't they? They'll be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. But as this Mike motorbike was saying, what really matters is, where do we need to be? Where do we want to be? Where are we heading to? What's the change that we want to make? And so getting clear on that is really, really helpful. Getting clear on the change that we want to make rather than just where we don't want to be is a really, really useful way to end up in that exact place that we want. Because otherwise, we'll just be moving frantically away from where we are. We'll just be somewhere else. And so granted, it'll be very successful at getting rid of the panic, the crisis, the discomfort, whatever it is that's got us to move. But it doesn't necessarily move us to where we would actually like to be, to the life that we would actually like to be living, to the values that we want to be following for ourselves, to the person that we want to become. And so I thought I'd share it with you because obviously if you're in business at the moment, then it might prove useful just in terms of the way Mike Motorbike meant it. But even if you're not, and of course even if you are, there's a deeper meaning there, isn't there? Which is to do with how we live our lives and how we make change for ourselves. Do we just want to escape where we are in any direction, which might end up in just as bad a place or maybe even a worse place? Or do we actually want to try and crystallize where it is that we want to be? Do we want to find out what that B in the top left-hand circle is for us and then actually head to there instead of just running in any direction? And so that's why I wanted to share it to you today. I hope it's useful. And if it was, then please share it. And you can subscribe for free to the podcast. You can watch the videos at asliceoftherapy.com. You can work with me one-to-one. I'm Alun Parry at Liverpool, psychotherapy.co.uk. And thanks for listening. I'll be back with another one tomorrow.